Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney and I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. George A. Pruitt. Dr. Pruitt is President Emeritus and Board Distinguished Fellow at Thomas Edison State University. Prior to his 35-year presidency at the university, he served in executive leadership positions at Illinois State University, Towson State University, Morgan State University, Tennessee State University, and the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. He currently serves as a member of the Bloomfield College Board of Trustees, member and past chairman of the Board of Directors of SEEDCO, which is the Structured Employment Economic Development Corporation, and he's also a member of the board of Greater Trenton Incorporated. Dr. Pruitt has served on various boards of directors and trustees spanning higher education, banking, healthcare, and economic development. He is active in the formulation of educational policy nationally and within the state of New Jersey, and has consulted widely in business and government. He has served in an advisory capacity to 5 secretaries of education under 3 presidents of both parties. He is the recipient of 6 honorary degrees, in addition to numerous awards, honors, and commendations. And with that lengthy resume, again, we welcome you, Dr. Pruitt. Thank you so much for joining us today and presenting on your book, From Protest to President, in honor of Black History Month. And I think your story really rings true for a lot of the things and themes we celebrate in this month. So before we jump into your talk, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of Dr. Pruitt's talk today, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. There is a survey available at the end of the program, so if you have time, we ask that you please complete it. We always love hearing your feedback, and this program is being recorded, so everybody who registered will get a link to the recording. And there is a web address on the screen there, and I will put that in the chat. If you are interested in more information on Dr. Pruitt's book, you can find it there at that web address, and as I said, I will upload it to the chat so that everybody has a live link to it. Lastly, I just want to do a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device like earbuds or a headset, you can check to make sure that they are connected there. At any point, if you have any problems during the presentation, there is a raise hand button in the middle. You can click on that, that'll alert me, and I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you're having. And lastly, as I mentioned, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A and a chat button. Feel free to use either to communicate with us, and we'll be happy to answer them, as I said, at the end of the program. So that is everything that I have for you. So it is my distinct pleasure again to turn it over to Dr. Pruitt.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. Before we begin, I'd like to express my appreciation and gratitude to Jennifer Nelson, the New Jersey State Librarian, for extending me this invitation to present as a part of your Black History celebration. I'd also like to acknowledge and express my appreciation to Dr. Pamela Pruitt, Executive Director of the Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Rider University. Rider is including this as a part of their African American History celebration. And I want to extend a special acknowledgement to Dr. Melissa Mazak. Melissa and I have worked together for 15, 16 years. She takes what I write and she makes it readable. And so without her assistance, this book wouldn't have been possible or nearly as much fun. Well, I'm delighted to be here today. Two of the questions that come to me most often is first, why did you write a book? And candidly, I struggled with that as to whether I should do it or not. Everybody's got a story, but that doesn't mean everybody should write a book. But I have not had a quiet academic life. And after over 50 years in higher education and being involved in a lot of different kinds of activities, you create a portfolio of experiences. And the issue comes is, what do you do with it? And I hope what this book does is it passes instructive things on that might be useful to others, or at least interesting, and that it may help others learn from where I have been and help them get to where they want to go. The other question that I frequently get asked is, what about the title, From Protest to President? Well, that's literally because my pathway to the presidency was born out of protest. I was born in a little town in Mississippi, Canton, Mississippi, and I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Now, most Black folks from Chicago are either from Mississippi, or their parents were from Mississippi, or their grandparents were from Mississippi. They went up the Illinois Central Railroad from Illinois to Chicago as part of the Great Migration, and my family was a part of that. My mother was from Canton, and when she got pregnant with me and my brother, she went home to my grandparents' house to have us delivered. My uncle, for whom I'm named, for many years was the only Black physician in Canton. And so I was born in Canton, but I grew up on the south side of Chicago. But like many people, we spent our summers and holidays back in Mississippi. And if you would go to Mississippi in the summertime, you'd see a lot of Illinois license plates. So I grew up in two places that were, one, the rural South, and well, actually it wasn't rural, it's a small town 20 miles north of Jackson, Mississippi, and the south side of Chicago. Very different places, but what both these places had in common is that they were segregated, racist, oppressive, and violent. When I was visiting my grandparents, the only time that my grandfather was a very kindly gentleman, and the only time that I ever got a whipping from him, and by the way, we didn't get spankings, we got whippings. Usually a switch was the instrument of choice, occasionally a belt. But the only time that I ever received any of those things from him was I was visiting once and I had a Cub Scout shirt on. And on the corner of the shirt was our troop and indicated we were from Chicago. I was wearing that thing out, and he made a point of telling me never to wear that out of the house. And even at a young age, I understood why. Because people that were visiting back from the North were particular targets of harassment by those in Mississippi that wanted to make it clear to us that even though we may be living in Chicago, where the rules are different, that we were in Mississippi now. I remember we had been home about 2 weeks when Emmett Till was killed. I was 9 years old, and Emmett Till was the same age as my brother, who was 14. We had been at home when that happened, and we, like the rest of the nation, was horrified and outraged by the murder and mutilation of this 14-year-old kid. But I will also tell you that Black folks that grew up in Mississippi or knew Mississippi will tell you that it was not uncommon for Black people to disappear, and under reasons that couldn't be explained. But this case made national attention because his mother wanted to make sure that the world knew what they did to her son. My father was a mortician, and he knew Mr. Rayner, who handled the Emmett Till body and the funeral. And he put my brother and I in a car, my mother and my brother and I in a car, and drove us to the funeral home to view his body. Of course, everyone in America saw his body because it was on the front page of all the Black newspapers in the country. It was in Jet magazine, it was in Ebony magazine, and it was a national outrage. So if you live in places that are segregated, oppressive, and violent, you're constantly living with the choice about what do you accommodate, what do you tolerate, and what do you take on to change. So as I got older and we got into the 60s and the activism that was associated with that, and the civil rights movement that was given birth during that period, which actually started with Reconstruction and continues to this day, we were constantly confronted with the decision about what do we do? What do we tolerate? What do we accommodate? And what do we work to change? My first bit of activism occurred when I was a junior in high school, where in 1963, we organized a boycott of the Chicago public schools to try to get superintendent fired. Chicago was the second largest public school system in America, and it was by far the most segregated school system in America of any city in the North. I went off to college at the University of Illinois, and there were 35,000 students there and only 250 Black students, and I'm not aware of any member of the faculty that was of color or any member of the administration. And we began to organize to try to figure out if we could change that. And we did. And what came out of that was a thing called Project 500 to try to increase the diversity of the University of Illinois. After 5 semesters at Champaign, I transferred to Illinois State University and graduated there. At ISU, there were about 18,000 students and 135 Black students. There were 2 African-American members of the faculty and 1 member of the administration. And we began to organize there. And we organized the Black Student Association, and I was elected its first president. The first time I ever saw the inside of a college or university president's office was when my colleagues and I occupied the president's office, issued our non-negotiable demands, which is what you did at that time, and engaged the university to try to change it and improve it and make it a more hospitable place for people of color. We essentially had 4 demands. 1, to increase the number of African-American students enrolled in the university, to diversify the staff, faculty of the university, to examine the curricular and instructional program of the university to make it more inclusive, and to change the cultural environment of the institution to make it a more welcoming and hospitable place for different people, and particularly people of color. When from the time I could remember to the time I got into college, I knew what I was going to do with my life. And it wasn't going to be academia. I was going to be a doctor. There was no question about it. If you look at what I said in my yearbook, I was going to be a doctor. Because when I spent all of those hot summers in Mississippi, I followed my uncle around wherever he went. I had my appendix removed when I was 10 years old, and I actually was taken to the operating room, and I watched a couple of appendectomies before mine. And for reasons I'm not sure I understand, I still have my appendix at home in a bottle. My uncle gave it to me, and I've kept it as a keepsake. But when I got into college, I majored in biology, I minored in chemistry. I kind of lost direction because it became clear to me, while I love the sciences, I still consider myself a science person. I really didn't have the passion for it that you have to be to a good doctor. And I realized that I really didn't necessarily want to be a doctor. I wanted to be my uncle. And if my uncle had been a plumber, I would have wanted to have been a plumber. So I really didn't know where I was going to go or what my path was going to be. But after we got engaged at Illinois State, the negotiations turned into a collaboration, and we got involved in the creation of changing and reforming the university. And as we began to execute and implement the things that we were trying to make at ISU. Another thing that happened to me along the road way before I got to college, I was at the mortuary where my father worked, and I went down the street to get my hair cut. And I walked into the barbershop, and as I sat there was this extraordinary man lecturing and talking, and I was fascinated. He was a member of the Nation of Islam, and he was talking about the religious and social dogma of that particular sect, which I really didn't identify with or relate to at all. But the thing that fascinated me was his discussions about the notion and obligation of people to take ownership of their own destiny and be the creators of their own future. I grew up in a time and place, both in Chicago and Mississippi, where our identity was prescribed for us. Our potential was prescribed for us. Where we could live was prescribed for us. Where we could go to school and worship was prescribed for us. It was an entire system that was the opposite of empowerment. It was a system designed for subjugation and disempowerment. And there was this brilliant man talking about the obligation and the opportunity for us individually to take ownership of our lives and not let other people decide who we were. A couple of weeks later, my father kept us up late at night to watch a late night television show by a guy named Irv Kupcinet, because he wanted us to hear the speaker. And when I saw the speaker on television, it was the guy I met in the barbershop, and that man was Malcolm X. I would see him 2 or 3 times later, and we would spar and debate and argue. But the basic notion about building a life and future for yourself, that you don't get the life you deserve, you get the life that you construct for yourself. Sometimes having to overcome impediments that were given to you, and if you were a person of color, that you had to get used to overcoming those impediments and confronting those impediments, unless you were going to succumb to having the other forces of society deciding who you are. Muhammad Ali is often quoted as saying, "You don't get to decide who I am." I heard that long before Muhammad Ali was on the scene, coming out of the mouth of Malcolm X. And it changed me. The idea that the obligation of my life, and not only my life, but my community was going to look like, that I had an obligation to participate in shaping it and making decisions that were going to create something that went beyond what was given to us. That was an empowering thing that has stayed with me to this day, and it certainly drove my activism at Illinois State. While I was at Illinois State, I finished graduate school there, and I was offered a job there. And in the process of implementing and executing the things that we were trying to get the university to do, I met a man from Chicago named Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton was the officer of the Black Panther Party in Chicago, and he was an extraordinary man. We invited him down to campus. We befriended each other, and I got to know him very well. Fred Hampton, unfortunately, was assassinated by the law enforcement community of Chicago. I use that word carefully and thoughtfully and with some intentionality, and we don't have time to undergo the discussions of the circumstances of his death here. But I encourage you to Google Fred Hampton and Fred Hampton's death and how it occurred and what happened. And I think if you do that, the court action that Fred Hampton's survivors brought against the law enforcement community that resulted in a multi-million-dollar settlement debunked the notion that had been given by the police, and I think would create the justification of your understanding why I use the word assassination to account that, because he was in fact assassinated by law enforcement. That profoundly affected me, as well as did the entire African-American community at Illinois State University. To the point where we continued to protest and expanded our protest. There was a particular incident around an occupation of the building on a flagpole in Illinois State. And again, I won't go into these details. They are in the book. But my activism in that had caused my life to be threatened. I was taken to the security headquarters at night because to protect me. It was a very turbulent, difficult, and challenging time in the university. But what I'm proudest of my time at ISU, we changed the arc of that university that continues to move to this day. And I'm really happy that I was able to be a part of that. But I also, at the same time, fell in love with higher education. I saw what higher education could do. I saw about its liberating power. Back to Malcolm's thesis, I saw about how it was a human capital building experience. And I wanted that experience accessible and available to all people, to everyone. And that, if there has been a theme in my career, it has been about expanding access, about changing higher education, but changing it because I loved it, not because I was trying to destroy it, so that it could fulfill this uplifting role for our country. I was invited to then leave ISU and go to Towson State University. I had a stint at Morgan State University, at Tennessee State University, particularly interested tenure at Tennessee State. I was a vice president there and participated in a historic court battle where at the end of that court battle, Tennessee State University absorbed and took over the University of Tennessee at Nashville. It was the only court-ordered desegregation case in the country involving higher education, and it was the only court-ordered desegregation case at any level, K through 12 through higher education, where the historically Black institution survived. And that was a very challenging time for us. In a way, we refought the Civil War in Tennessee. And I hope you'll find that particularly part of the book challenging and interesting. You know, I was president of Thomas Edison 35 years, and I have much to celebrate. I have spent literally over half my life at Thomas Edison. But that time at Tennessee State was particularly meaningful and special for me, as were those people and as what we did there. I left Tennessee State and became the executive vice president for the Council for the Advancement of Experiential Learning. My intent here is not to recreate my resume. Andrew kind of laid that out before he introduced me. But one of the interesting things about a book is that when you write it and do a retrospective of your life, there are certain themes that evolve in your from your work that you're not aware of when you're in the middle of it. And when I went to Yale, I understood and got embraced and fell in love with the particular characteristics of adults and adult higher education. And if you're interested in access and building the human capital of the country, you can't leave the majority of the country out. And adults today, and have always been majority of the people in the society. And today, adults make the majority of students involved in higher education. That was not the case when I was in college. And so to be part of the adult learning movement, spearheaded and led by Yale, and to come to Thomas Edison, which was one of the founding institutions in the adult learning movement, along with Empire State College, the University of Maryland University College, the Regents External Degree Program, which is now Excelsior University, Minnesota Metropolitan College. We were part of the vanguard of an educational movement that was creating new processes and new technology and new understandings about how adult learners learn and navigate the academy. It was exciting to be a part of that movement. I will tell you that when I came to Thomas Edison, I had no intention of spending 35 years here. I was never afraid of being fired. And being a college president is a high-risk occupation. Today, the average tenure of a college president is around 5 or 6 years. So it's a very difficult job to have, and it's very demanding. And as time has gone on, the challenges of the job have increased. The capacities of some of the people in those positions has not kept pace, and that gap has created the rapid turnover as we're experiencing. And that's certainly been a difficult thing for colleges and universities. But I was always afraid of staying too long, because one of the biggest challenges one has is letting inertia and routine take over your life, where you say, this is June, and this is what we do in June. Organizations are dynamic. They have to move, and either they move forward or they atrophy, but they never stand still. And one of the things that I worried about is having routine settle, and I didn't want that to happen. We were able to attract an extraordinary group of talented and energetic, enthusiastic, mission-driven professionals that were attracted to our special mission. And we recruited some of the finest adult learners in the world, literally from all over the world. And they stayed here a very long time. They didn't do that because they didn't have other opportunities or other options. All of them did. All of them did. But they stayed here because they were energized by they knew that at this institution was on the cutting edge of something important and special. And I had enough sense to try to find and recruit people that were much smarter than I am. I always used to say to people is that I came to work every day hoping to be the dumbest guy in the building, because I wanted to try to find energetic, enthusiastic, talented people, turn them loose, get out of their way, and let them to create. And it was that autonomy and freedom that they had to innovate and experiment always obsessive about quality. Another one of our mantras is that because we were doing things differently, we had an obligation to do things better. And that there was no rationale or reason for doing it differently unless we could do it better. We evaluated everything, and we could support with unimpeachable metrics that the outcomes and experiences of our students was equal or better than those from traditional backgrounds. I was very proud of the fact that for 5 years in a row, Thomas Edison State University had the highest pass rate on the CPA exam of any accounting program in the state. And we have some pretty strong institutions that offer accounting in the state. So that commitment to quality, that spirit of innovation, and the capacity to attract some of the best talent that we could find meant that we were doing very special things here because we had very special people here. They stayed here not because they couldn't make more money other places. They certainly could. And when the proprietary schools came along, many of them were approached with much higher economic rewards if they left and participated in that sector, but they didn't do it because they knew that they had the freedom and opportunity to do something here that they couldn't do at other institutions. And we all had that common spirit of innovation, camaraderie, community, and family that allowed us to do something special, and we did. Many of as far as we can tell, and it's hard to know this, we were the first college or university in the country to offer an accredited complete degree online. And even though that was a capacity and competency we had, we were also a pioneer in prior learning and portfolio assessment. We were one of the first colleges and universities to do that. And we were one of the first schools that had graduates that were able to go through a portfolio assessment process through the valid and reliable assessment of experiential learning and graduate without ever taking a college class. We didn't have many of those. Those are extraordinary people. But we had that. Our graduates went on to some of the finest graduate schools in the country, including all of the Ivy League institutions, and it was a very special place. We built 8 buildings in downtown Trenton and changed the face of the state capitol, and had an extraordinary impact on the physical environment we live in. I've always firmly believed that colleges and universities had an obligation to be good citizens in the communities in which they resided. We had a strong sense of mission, of a stewards of place. And I'm proud of the campus and the physical place and the community and the environment we built in this city. One of the things that I'm just very happy about the experiment we did and the way it came out. Colleges and universities have 3 inherent obligations: teaching and learning, innovation and research, and public service. By the nature of this institution, the public service part of that formula was very difficult. So we created the John S. Watson Institute for Public Policy, an extraordinary organization. We did not want to do a think tank. You know, academic think tanks, and they're important and there's a place for them. They do public policy autopsies. But when a mayor or a legislator or a public official or a nonprofit executive is struggling with a very difficult problem and wanted help, real world hands-on assistance from people, experts in the field that had been there and done that, they had nowhere to turn. And I wanted to create that capacity within Thomas Edison State University. And the Watson Institute brilliantly and magnificently filled that role. Our most important, we had diverse clients in healthcare and education, but our most important and visible client was the New Jersey Urban Mayors Association, where we were engaged with the state's mayors as a resource and capacity to helping these people that had some of the most difficult jobs in the country come up with rational, thoughtful solutions and give them the expertise and advice that a corporation can go out and pay high-priced consultants. Cities don't have that capacity. They then asked us to come and help grow the capacity of their employees. And that's when we created the John S. Watson School of Public Service, one of the first schools of public service in the country. So it was an exciting ride. It was 35 years, but no 2 years were ever the same. And we tested ourselves by having really serious, thoughtful, detailed 5-year strategic plans. where in each of these plans, we had a thoughtful discussion and description of what is the university that we're trying to create. And every day we came here trying to build something that did not yet exist. And we were very successful at that, both in the size, growth, diversity of the program offerings, the School of Nursing, the doctoral program, the business doctoral program. We were very successful in doing that. We did extraordinary things with our military. We were one of the first colleges and universities in the country that participated in a pilot program to allow us to serve military when they were in active duty. You know, the military had this incentive program by which it said, join the military and serve your country because good things will happen to you when you leave. Well, that for most of the time we've been around, that was the incentive. Somebody got the idea. The biggest expenditure in the Pentagon budget is not on hardware and equipment, it's on training. So someone thought, wouldn't it be good if we could have, if the incentive structure would be to stay in the service and go to college while you're here, instead of leave and take all of the training investment with you. And the military did that, and they asked 15 colleges and universities to come and create a pilot to see if that was possible. Thomas Edison was one of them. We created the technology and the experiences that allowed active duty personnel to earn degrees while they were deployed. And during the height of the Gulf War, we had over 4,000 students deployed in the Gulf on ships in Iran, in Iraq, and Afghanistan. We had fatalities, I forgot the number, but you know, some of our students were combat fatalities. But we created the processes that other schools are now doing in wholesale in engaging with the military, but also is obsessed about quality. We had the highest completion rate in the Navy college program of any college in the university. The outcomes that we produced were extraordinary, and it was a wonderful place to be for a very long time. One of the interesting aspects of this conference today is that as we sit here, Thomas Edison State University is the only institution in the country that's responsible for its state library. And there is some detail in the book about how that happened, why it happened, and what was the benefit to the library community of that transition and change in governance, and how the state library and how the library community broadly has benefited by a result of this unique innovation. So I'm going on and on and on and on, but I'm trying to communicate a view that what happened here was an extraordinary things that happened at an extraordinary place. Yes, I had a role in it for a very long time. But basically what I'm proudest of is the people that we created. This institution was not built by me. It was built by a community of people that all brought their unique talents, resources, and dedication to create something unique and something special. And I was gratified and blessed to be a part of that. I think I should probably stop right now, Andrew, and see if you've got questions from the audience. And I'd like to respond to anything there, and I'll go on depending on what the questions are. But I hope you understand why I wrote this book, what's incorporated in it. And I really hope that the men and women that were part of this community over the entire 50 years of its existence will read it and understand about the special institution that they participated in, the special experience they were provided, the extraordinary people that worked here and the contributions that they made, and the wonderful thing that took place in this place during that time.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Pruitt. If anybody does have questions, please feel free, send them in the chat, send them in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. One of the questions that maybe you can delve a little bit deeper into is maybe how did your experiences in social activism kind of frame how you approached higher education at Thomas Edison?
Well, you know, people understand the presidency as a CEO of a large, complex organization. And that's only part of the job. The other part of the job is that you're also the person that articulates and expresses the vision, the values of the community that you build. And so it's important to do that because it's important for people in an academic community to understand that they're part of something that's bigger than themselves, that goes and transcends the particular tasks and jobs that you serve. And part of the responsibility for the president is to do that. I had a foundation director challenge me one day because we were talking about the institution's mission. We were very careful about wording our mission. I've always felt that most schools don't do a very good job of expressing that. They'll talk about teaching, research, and public service. Well, you ought to be able to identify a school by its mission statement because it talks about who you are. And we had a one-sentence mission statement about Thomas Edison State College was created to provide flexible, high-quality collegiate learning opportunities for self-directed adults. That was our mission statement. So I had a foundation director said, well, that's interesting, and it's a really good mission statement, but why? What's the vision? Why is that important? What's the so what question? And so we came up with a vision statement, which basically said that the future of this country depends upon the past. This country has always depended upon the quality of its human capital. And the Thomas Edison State University and its particular mission, it was our responsibility to contribute to the development of the human capital of our country so that our citizens could carry out our obligations as stewards of the country, which separates us from other countries. It defines the difference between a democracy where people are citizens versus a country where people are subjects. The entire arc of my experience was about trying to make this country fulfill the promise of its founding documents. You know, most countries are defined by their populations, their tribes, and their geography. This is the only country that has had the audacity to say, we're going to have a democracy that's not based on those things, that is going to be diverse, and it's going to be defined by sets of principles and ideas and ideals. And that is the common standard that's going to define us as a nation, not our race, not our ethnicity, not our national origin. And that's an extraordinarily bold idea. The thing that underpinned it, all of the social activism that I was involved in and all was around me, was focused about the focal point of all of that was why do we do that? Because it's our obligation to participate in making this country true to its initial founding promises. The notion all men are created equal with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, people have criticized Jefferson because of his history and his connection with slavery. Certainly, I detested slavery. It was a horrible practice. I don't celebrate Jefferson because he was a slave owner. I celebrate Jefferson because he articulated what the common policies and principles that we're going to have as a nation by which we defined ourselves. And that deserves to be celebrated. We haven't been true to that. We aren't there yet. We've been working on it for 250 years and we haven't gotten there yet. But that's the prize, to make this nation that. And that's the struggle we have. And so it was the social activism, all of this, the underpinning, not just me, but all of the movements, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, is about how we have a nation that facilitates the kind of promise that are found in our Constitution and in our Declaration of Independence. It provided a standard and a reference point about why we do the work we do. So my social activism, you know, people would tell me that you're a product of the 60s, and I would always push back. No, I'm not. The 60s were a product of us. And I'm proud of that. And we didn't get it all right. And there were some excesses, and there were some problems that we created in the 60s we're still living with. But by and large, the continuum of change that took place, and it was a violent, turbulent time. There were multiple assassinations. There were riots, violence, campuses burned down. People died at Kent State, at Jackson State, Southern University. That's why I take this obligation so seriously. And that's why I was so passionately committed to it, because I understood its place in making this and allowing this country to fulfill the promise that it started to and is aspiring to and has not yet achieved. So that's really kind of a preachy way of saying, yeah, the social activism, I think, motivated me and my colleagues and all of us because it created some context. Why do we do this? I want to say one other quick thing about that, and I do write about this in the book. One of the gifts that my father gave me was the fact that he was a mortician. Now, it's also the source of a lot of jokes, but from the time I was little to this day, when I would go to that place where he worked, I would see people that were younger than me and that were older than me. And most children and kids and young people don't think about the fact that all of us have an expiration date. And we do. But I was always been mindful of that. And that always, in the sense in me, was a sense of urgency, that life was precious, it was finite, and not to be wasted. And so that had, I was always motivated. I love living and I want to live a long time. But the purpose of life is the living of it. But I also believe we have an obligation not to waste it. And so I was sort of driven about how do we use the time we have for some productive purpose, and how do we make sure that we leave this place better than we found it? You know, one of the things that I have in that book is a definition of what an effective presidency looks like. I hope you get it out and read it. I hope you will agree with it. But that was the measuring point that I always used. I wanted to make sure that we did our part and that every day we advanced this institution and made it better than we found it. I'm really pleased and proud of the work that was done here. I think we achieved that. I think we did that. I'm delighted in the role I played. My role was important, but again, none of this would have happened. You know, we are not a building, we're not built around our technology or our media, we're built around our people. And we're only as good as the people we had. And I had the privilege to work with some of the most extraordinary people that higher education has ever produced. And I'm really privileged for that. And I'm really happy that I had that opportunity.
Can you discuss a notable challenge you faced as president of Thomas Edison and how you addressed that challenge?
Well, there was a different challenge every day. I mean, from the very beginning, the issue was this a real college? You'll remember there were no precedents. There were no other institutions like ours. Those institutions that I mentioned from the beginning, there were just a few handful of us that were being created. So how do you have a college that has no faculty and no students walking around? The whole concept of a university that was not campus-based was a challenge of creating our credibility. Accreditors didn't know what to do with us. In terms of how do you have quality assurance standards. The state and the government didn't know how to fund us because, you know, the cost structure of our institution was totally different. They still don't know how to do that. The challenges were enormous because what we were doing was creating new things where there were no precedents or reference points. So you had those challenges. How do you build things with integrity and quality that are different, that can command the public confidence and the respect of the other parts of the community, of the other parts of the higher education community, where they will accept you as a peer, that you do what they do, but you just do it differently. You produce the same outcomes, but you have a different mechanism to do that. We were extraordinarily successful in that. You know, one of the things our founding president, James Brown, did, which was very helpful in that regard, President Brown's father, for many years, had been dean of the faculty at Princeton. And so when Thomas Edison was being created and put together, no one knew what kind of campus we needed or what kind of physical plant that a university or college had need that didn't have students. And one of the wonderful things that President Brown did was he took us to Princeton. Princeton University was the incubator, and we were physically, for the first part of our time, on the Princeton University campus, on the Forrestal campus. Well, just the fact that we were physically sitting on Princeton University's campus was enormously helpful in gaining us acceptance and credibility that this thing wasn't as crazy as it sounded. We had challenges in Washington. You know, I spent a lot of time in the accrediting community. A lot of this is in the book. there's a thing called the National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity. Most people have never heard of that. Most people know what accreditation is. Well, the NASICI, as it's called, it is the body that accredits the accreditors. And a lot of policy at the federal level is made by that body. And it is important because it affects what institutions do on the ground, because the accreditors themselves have to be acknowledged and recognized by NASICI. I was served on that for over 20 years. To this day, I'm the longest serving person who ever served on NASICI. And I was the only one that continued to be served across as parties changed. I continued to be on that. I was invited to testify on the Hill 3 times. And I was invited. I wasn't called. I wasn't summoned to testify. I was invited to testify because the Congress wanted advice about how you create regulations and policies and protect consumers from bad practice. And we were viewed as an exemplar. So people wanted to know how to do it and how to do it right. When the proprietary schools came in, the first iteration of that, they knew they would be criticized and be attacked. So they were very careful to pay attention to the quality assurance mechanisms. And the work they did at the beginning was very good. But many of them got seduced and corrupted as they pursued shareholder return and not quality. And they copied and used our terminology, our language. One of them came and interviewed us for 3 days. We in the higher education community, we like to disseminate what we did. Well, a lot of the proprietaries copied us. This one organization, and I'm not going to mention their name right now. I think I might do it. I think I might put it in the book. They spent 3 days with us. And when they left, they offered me a job. They offered our chief academic officer a job, and our chief IT guy, Drew Hopkins, they offered him a job because they wanted us to come and help them build this proprietary school. We all turned it down, but when they started, they took verbatim stuff from our website, our literature, and put it on their website. So how do you differentiate yourself from a sector whose quality and reputation is very uneven? Some of them are very good, some of them are lousy, some of them have been closed down and shut down because they've misled consumers and cheated people and left students out there with student loans and no place to go. So some of them have been pretty horrendous and bad, but they use our language, our techniques, and they go after the same market. How do you separate and differentiate your place so people will understand that we are the exemplars in that area? And we were very successful with that. The challenges never stop. They never end. Part of the presidency is making sure that all of the integrity of the institution is maintained, the quality is there. But you have to constantly be engaged in the legislature and in the Congress, because what the government does affects what we do. So the challenges are endless and continuous, and they don't ever stop. And that's part of the presidency. That's also being part of an institution that's different. We are a niche institution. We are very different. And a lot of the standards and language and rules that make sense for a traditional college make no sense for us at all.
Great. Somebody asked about if there's a book signing with this event. There's not, but if people wanted to, do you have upcoming events that you're doing that are readings or book signings for your book?
Not sure. I mean, there are discussions. I'm thinking about doing one. I really want to do that, particularly for the people at Thomas Edison. I've gotten a lot of questions. I have signed a bunch of them. I haven't figured that out yet, but I'd like to be able to do that, particularly for the people at Thomas Edison, particularly people at the State Library, people that are interested in this journey, have shared it with me. I would love to be able to do that. I haven't figured out exactly what we're going to do, but stay tuned. I'm working on that because I really would like to do that.
How do you feel about race relations today?
Well, they're challenging. There was a good friend of mine, a woman named Flonzie Brown Goodlow, Uh, she wrote a book called Looking Back to Move Ahead. And Flonzie was from Canton, Mississippi, too. She was a civil rights activist. She was the first African-American woman to be elected to a public office in the state of Mississippi. Flonzie Brown Wright, writes the last name, W-R-I-G-H-T. Flonzie was on a webinar with a bunch of African-American college students. And they were bemoaning the racism of the police, issues with the police, all of the current challenges that people in this country are facing. And they were decrying how difficult it was. And I'll never forget Flonzie's response. She said, "That's absolutely true. You are facing those issues, and you should not accept them, and you should be engaged. But," she said, "what I want you to understand, though, is that despite there being issues and challenges, it is better off today than it has ever been." And they were startled by that, but it is true. Flonzie, life was at risk. She got run off of a highway in Mississippi because she was registering Black people to vote. You are not going to get shot or killed or lose your job or have your house burned down because you go to the polls and vote today. I laugh when I hear the issues about implicit bias and microaggressions. Damn, I wish I had to deal with implicit bias and microaggressions. I was dealing with people that were throwing bottles at us. There was nothing implicit about the aggression. There was nothing micro about the aggression. It was upfront and in your face. So, yes, there are challenges, but I also think it's a mistake to lose sight of the fact that there is a continuum. I have been on a continuum. It is so much better today than it was when I was growing up. I never thought I'd see an African-American elected president of the United States. Never thought I'd see that happen. We had a trustee, Frank Clyburn. He was the number 2 executive at Merck. When I see people like Frank Clyburn and Ken Frazier, who was CEO of Merck, I see the accomplishments of what African Americans have been able to do once the gates of opportunity have been opened. It's wonderful. But I also think that the challenge of people, of social conscious people today, it's not so much about access or civil rights. It's the rights are there. The issue is how we're going to engage and exercise them. Voter turnout is way too low. We have to participate. We have to get in the game. We have an obligation to be the architect, not only of our own futures, but of the sign of society that we're going to be in. We have to be thoughtful that the problems we deal in are complicated, and simple soundbite solutions won't get it. And the hard work is done in local communities on the ground. Public education in urban areas in this city where people of color are, for the most of the students are people of color, has failed, totally collapsed. We have students graduating from high school. First of all, too many of them don't graduate at all. My first bit of activism was in the Chicago public schools. By any standard you want to use, the Chicago public schools, as bad as they were then, are so much worse off today than they were then. And while resources and money is a problem, the problem that urban schools in this country are facing today are not based on money. They're based on the fact that they're constructed around all kinds of considerations except the safety and education of our kids. Those are difficult discussions. The people that work in those school systems are unhappy. They know the schools have failed. But those teachers aren't going to work because they have malice toward our kids. They love their kids and their job. The superintendents and school board members, they're not trying to hurt our kids, but the systems has failed because the problems are systemic. And we need to have a difficult conversation because these things go way beyond race. The issue about crime and the justice system. Most of the victims of violent crime in this country are people of color. And so we have to look at policing. The police have these two cultures. There's the guardian culture. The guardian culture wants to take care of people and respect and protect and serve. But the warrior culture is at war. And those people that beat that poor kid to death in Memphis, with body cams on. They knew what they were doing and they weren't afraid to be seen or recorded because they had a warrior mentality and they were at war. And there is collateral damage in wars, and they viewed this kid was collateral damage. That's unacceptable, but it's a complicated problem. At the same time, our police see the worst that the society has to offer. It's a horrible job. They put their life at risk. They have high suicide rates. They have high rates of alcoholism. We need to embrace and retrain the police, and we need to hold them accountable, but it's a complicated question. So the issues are a lot more complicated today than what they were when I was growing up. They were much clearly defined. The good guys and bad guys were much more clearly defined, and the good guys and bad guys weren't simply defined about race. There were a lot of white people involved in the civil rights movement. White people were killed in the civil rights movement. The freedom riders that went to the South, a lot of white people on those buses. So we just didn't do that by ourselves. So they are very complicated, and it requires complicated solutions. And responses. I am worried about the demagoguery that you have today. You know, people like the governor of Florida, who seems to be terrified of an idea. Demagogues are always scared of our ideas, and they have to be confronted and dealt with. And higher education needs to be a marketplace where controversial ideas are debated, not censored. But that's also true on the left too. You know, there were some great satirical comedians when I was growing up. Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul and James Carlin. And they loved campuses. I would not be a comic and go on a college campus today because we are too sensitive and too quick to anger and too intolerant of other points of view that we find distasteful or difficult. And that is coming from the right and the left. And that is a challenge for higher education. And that is a challenge for creating solutions to complex problems that require people of different points of view to come down and have some common understanding of what's going on in our society and how we have solutions. There are solutions to these problems, and we have the resources to solve them. We don't have the political will because the politics gets in the way. Governing actually and the processes of politics gets in the way of creating solutions instead of expediting them. But it starts with individual responsibility, citizens doing what they need to do in their local church, in their local community, to say what's going on now is not acceptable, and we're going to change that and be a part of the solution, and not to stand back and throw rocks and bricks or to emote and be angry. I had a friend of mine, my predecessor, Lorraine Matusak, that would say, leaders are people that have a passion to make a difference. And I would tell her all the time, that's not true. We don't suffer from lack of passion. We suffer from lack of capacity and the willingness to serve and to sacrifice and to work through solutions and get problems and come together as a country. So I see that my time is running out, and I have loved this. It has been fun. As you can tell, I could talk all day and probably talk too much as it is. But I hope you find the book of interest. I hope it stimulates discussion. I hope it stimulates you getting engaged in the things that confront our community. I hope you learn something from it, and I hope you benefit from the lessons that I tried to put in the book. And I thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about it.
Thank you, Dr. Pruitt. There's just one more question. I think it's a great way to kind of wrap up everything that we've been talking about. And it's 50 years ago, did you ever foresee Thomas Edison as a historically Black college and university?
Thomas Edison is historically Black college? No, I did never see it. You know, I wanted us to reflect the diversity of our community. And we had standards and metrics by which we evaluated it. The standard I used was this was a public institution. It ought to reflect the demographics of the public. That I wanted to make sure that last time I checked, we were about 15, African Americans were about 15% of the public. I wanted to make sure we had at least 15% of our enrollment coming from the African American community. I wanted to, but not just African American community. I wanted the Latino community and the other communities. This wanted to be a place of access and opportunity for people across the racial and spectrum. But no, I never saw or anticipated, or still don't, that Thomas Edison itself is going to become a sort of like I don't want to say historically Black college or university, because we certainly can't, we don't qualify for the historic. We're still a young institution as they go. I want this institution to be I want it to be true to its original mission statement, that we are a place for a high quality learning opportunities for self-directed adults, and that we are a portal of access for the adult learner to be the architects of construction of their life and to be good citizens of the country.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Pruitt. Very fascinating and enlightening talk, and we appreciate your time today. I also like to thank everybody who attended today. You make our programming worthwhile, and it's an honor to keep doing it for everybody. And just a reminder, this program was recorded, and a link will be shared to everybody who registered once it's been uploaded to our YouTube channel. So I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you, be safe, be well, and thank you for joining in our celebration of Black History Month.
Thank you.